Hello, welcome to West Virginia Author. I'm your host, Gordon Simmons, and it's my great privilege to have an author here today, Topper Sherwood, who has recently published a novel set in West Virginia, Carla Rising, but has been a longtime writer and native of West Virginia and known to the writing public here, and the publishing public for that matter. So just to start off, Topper, why a novel? Because your previous publishing interest in writing has been mainly journalistic, nonfiction, historical in nature.
Yeah.
This is a departure.
Yeah, well, the short answer is it just seemed like a better vehicle to get this story told. I published David Corbin's West Virginia Mine Wars, an anthology, and this was a collection of first-hand accounts,
historical documents,
right,
nonfiction,
especially journalists,
right,
which is
James
rich,
Cain and so forth.
Yeah, rich material, but it was also from the broad spread. Carla Rising really zeroes in on Blair Mountain, on the battle and the events leading up to Blair Mountain.
So it's a historical focus, but it's also in the fact that you're using a fictional vehicle. Again, like I say, a real departure from what you've done in the past in your work and your publishing and your editing and your writing itself. And I'm just sort of, you say it's a better vehicle. And I guess you think of people like Steinbeck or Orwell, or people that would use fiction for making historical events and episodes come to life. What, in your case, made that the best vehicle?
I wanted to look at the battle from different points of view. I have scenes involving the West Virginia governor. I have scenes involving the U.S. military guys who intervene, including a pilot or an intelligence officer who's based on a real guy. I break out the differences within the Union that to me were significant. Specifically, the people in the Union who believed that the only way that our backs are against the wall, the only way to get what we want and what we need is to march across that mountain with guns and take over the jail and free our people from jail in Logan County. So I express that dynamic. On the other side, those Union officers who said, we've got to keep this down. If we cannot shoot our way into Logan County, or we cannot shoot the Union's way into Logan County, we have to negotiate for a contract and negotiate with the governor. The governor's making promises to us on this side. And this was a real tension within the Union that I felt needed to be told.
Well, so even though it's fictional, I mean, you've got fictional characters in a fictional setting and scenario, the historical still is kind of the driver, I guess, for the plot?
Yes. And it was an effort to take these different points of view that we see in all the documentary material that I've done over the years. I've done a lot of articles for various magazines, from Golden Seal to Mid-Atlantic. I can't remember the name of the magazine now, but as well as the books. And I talked to a lot of people. I mean, talking to the children of the survivors was real interesting. And to hear to them talk about their father's remorse, for example, which I also built into the book. People on both sides. I don't know if you remember the Raymond Chafin biography I did some years ago.
Well, yeah, and speak about that a little bit. That was a University of Pittsburgh, I believe, published that.
University of Pittsburgh.
And it was an account.
It's still in print.
An account of the Kennedy election in 1960 in West Virginia from the standpoint of one of the county bosses.
Right. The boss of Logan County
the Democratic Party at the time, who played a humorous key role in what went on in the county versus Humphrey.
I've heard like 2 or 3 different versions of that legend. I mean, Denise Jardina fictionalized it in her book Unquiet Earth, I believe.
Okay, that's true.
And she
I'd
heard
forgotten
it.
That,
she told me she heard it from Gaston Caperton while they were waiting while they were on the same podium or on the same stage at some point.
This as an anecdote.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I heard the same thing from a friend of ours whose father was a judge.
But in the case of Raymond Chafin, you got it from the horse's mouth.
Yes.
I mean, you got his version. This is what happened. I was there.
Right.
This is what transpired.
Right.
And so it's a piece of West Virginia history, political history.
Right. And that was the thing that drew me to Raymond. But there were other things that made Raymond really interesting. I mean, his childhood growing up in Cow Creek. And I incorporate other things. His memories from he started in politics in 1936. And I tell people loosely, he'd been buying and selling votes since 1936. Right. But that wasn't the thing that drove him. He wasn't as he said, I wasn't a money man. I just liked to win them. And to him it was a
strategy game.
Yes, it was a strategy game. But so I borrowed from Raymond, and actually a friend of his family was a former mine guard. He worked for Chafin, and Raymond was there at the end of his life, and this man was in tears, asking if he could ever get forgiveness for the people that he killed in Logan.
Wow.
And I heard the same thing from the other side from Hawthorne Burgraff, and Burgraff, his father, was one of the defendants at Matewan. Hawthorne Burgraff told me the same thing.
After the shootout.
Yeah, that at the end of their lives, they were in tears over the killings that they did.
Well, that makes me think there was one of the journalists you anthologized when you edited West Virginia Mine Wars. Actually wrote a book, a guy named Winthrop Lane, called The Civil War in West Virginia.
Yeah. And
people think Civil War, they think, 1860s, but he was talking about the mine war period.
Oh, yeah.
And you have excerpts of his writing in that volume you did.
Yeah.
That, it was a civil war where brother is against brother.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that impressed me most in doing all these stories and looking at the situation is just how much power and control the Baldwin Felts Agency had. I read when I was doing a story for, I did one of the things in the Golden Seal book of the Mine Wars, and the idea that there was Tom Felts during the Matewan trial. Of course, he lost 2 brothers to the shooting.
In the shootout, yeah.
He was sitting at the prosecution's table. They were using evidence that his officers had gathered. I mean, I covered federal trials in Charleston in the 1980s, including political and mining scandal trials, and to have the brother of 2 of the victims sitting at the prosecution's table, to me was just it just said so much.
Well, it's one thing; it's very personal and it's familial almost.
Yeah, well, but those seats are reserved for state officials,
Right.
government officials.
Right, the governor or
and
something.
and very much. I mean, his agents, some of whom were former policemen. I mean, they were the force. And the fact that Don Chafin, the sheriff in Logan County, was paying these guys a salary based on the coal company income, and also paying them a deputy's salary. I mean, that was a private company. I mean, think of what that means. It was a private police force being paid by the sheriff, given badges by the sheriff, and yet to do the company, to carry out company policy, which also happened to become, county law.
So basically, the division between the company's interest and the governmental interests were entirely blurred.
They were entirely the same. I mean, that if there was you could not ask for a better example of a corporate police state than Logan County between those years.
So sort of what some people have called crony capitalism, I guess in more recent times, but it's the fusion of corporate and governmental interests.
Yeah, I found somewhere memos from, a reference to memos from organizers in the field. And they said, I can deal with policemen. I can deal with the...
This is union organizers.
Using union organizers saying, I'm going to forget how this is. I used it in the book. But how can we organize a place where every policeman is a paid assassin?
Wow, that was their goal.
That was him writing to his chief in Charleston.
Wow,
saying, "This is incredible. Get me out of here." This was the message.
Yeah.
Get me out of here. I can deal with policemen, but how do you deal with a place where every policeman is a corporate assassin?
Well, to kind of get back to what I was talking about earlier. I mean, obviously, you've delved into history. I mean, you've drenched yourself and immersed yourself in the history of this stuff because you're from West Virginia and you were interested in this, and it's your home. It's where you grew up, and you want to understand it. But you used a fictional vehicle in the novel here, Carla Rising, to sort of condense and I guess put forward a whole lot of material that you have looked at for a very long time.
An interpretation, really.
An interpretation. And what interests me too is that you did this living not in West Virginia, but in Germany, halfway across the globe. And I've heard over and over again from authors of various kinds, mainly fictional writers, that there is a sort of clarity that comes with distance sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Have you found that to be true?
Well, I guess I can be sensitive to the literalists who would say, "Oh, he was too far away from the subject to really know it the way we do or somebody else does."
Someone lives it,
right? But it did lend. Well, I had more time. I'm employed in Germany as a journalist, but I wasn't then. For the 2 years that the bulk of the time that I was working on Carla, I was unemployed and but also protected by the German social system, and able to work on it every day. I went to it like a job.
So we can thank Germany's social policy
social
for
democratic
your novel.
blah 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 system.
Great.
Yeah.
I wish we had better funding for the arts here, but we don't. But the distance did not hurt you. I mean, do you think it helped?
There were some books over there that I found on the subject. I mean, the
German libraries.
The Free University in Berlin has a wonderful collection of books on labor, and I think it was founded around 1960, and John F. Kennedy made a commissioning speech or something there. But it's a rich resource. I found some great books that I might not have found there. I don't know, but
they were books that were new to you.
They were new to me,
and they were about West Virginia's history.
Right. And, they were about labor history, some on West Virginia. There was one book I can think of in particular. It was by a West Virginia coal miner. But also Wyoming, about coal in general. I built some material in there about life underground and the mining industry. I also did, I've worn so many hats. I did some mine reclamation stuff up in Maryland after I moved away from Charleston. We lived in the Panhandle, in the Eastern Panhandle, and I had a job in Maryland. Martinsburg and Martinsburg, Shepherdstown. And I was working for the Maryland Department of Natural Resources on abandoned mines. And we were in one part of the program, we were mapping these mines, and I learned how extensive and how vast these things were. They were a bit older, I think, maybe than some of the
But like miles of tunnel.
Yeah. So I opened one chapter talking just about the vast city of underground in the
And that's something that's not generally known. I mean, I've heard people talk about that. Some of these older mine complexes were like literally miles.
Yeah.
And
oh yeah.
They just went on forever, and you could literally get lost in a mine.
Oh gosh, yeah. George Orwell writes about. I used him as an inspiration too. He wrote a book, The Road to Wigan Pier.
Right.
He writes
which was
about
the mining district in England.
Yeah. Part of the rite of passage is taking the young kid, the 14-year-old, down and losing him, and seeing if he panics.
Big snipe hunt.
Yeah, right. It's really it sounds awful. But wait a no, that wasn't him. That was Ken Follett.
Oh, okay.
It's in Ken Follett's book.
Okay.
That big massive history thing.
But those were in West Virginia as well, and in Appalachia, generally speaking.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that
huge complex of mine
I read
tunnels.
that the British miners who came to West Virginia to mine coal, they had their Davy lamps with them, and this was a tool that assessed the gas in the mine, and it had a gauze screen around it, and so around the flame. So the flame would flame up, heavy with methane if methane was there, but it wouldn't ignite the air around you. Really,
so it's a safe way to determine whether or not you're in a
if your
dangerous
lamp
place.
flames up, you got to get out.
Wow, better than having the canary die on you, I guess, or something.
Right. Waiting.
Too late by then. Well, but I want to go back to that too, because you had that extensive experience and knowledge of the literature and the history, and it not only delved into but published some of this stuff. They were familiar with it. How does that work itself into a fictional format?
Well, that was the hardest part. I mean, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. It took me 5 years. And
for the novel?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I've been gone a long time. But it was the hardest part. And I mean, trying to weave a made-up story involving individuals representing different elements of, how do you write a story about a war? Even
a civil war.
And I have a lot of characters in it, but the central characters, of course, are the Union folks. But I have one guy. Basically, I boiled it down to the Union guy who is in favor of marching over the mountain and shooting shooting their way into
liberating Logan.
Right, liberating Logan, and his brother, who is for negotiation. And they have a love interest. They have a common love interest. So I put a woman, Carla.
That's like sibling rivalry to move a novel along.
Yeah, well, also, but the love rivalry. And so I kind of made it a political division into a personal division.
And I guess that's what, I was kind of getting at. There's a transformation that takes place. And we see it in Steinbeck and certain writers where they take sort of big historical events and gel them into something personal or even, almost dramatic in the sense of a Greek play. And that ability to go from a big historic canvas that's the factual background of something to a narrative story.
To zero in, for example, on
that's got to be a real work of, as you say, transformation.
Well, Steinbeck had an advantage in that he was a journalist interviewing these folks as they came into California.
So he already saw it at that level.
Yeah, he actually knew these folks. I mean,
Well,
lots
you've done that too, though. You've talked to people who were, if not participants, the descendants. You've looked at documents like memoirs and other like more personal. I think something like Struggle in the Coalfields, for example, which is a personal account of the mine wars by one of the major players.
There's so much missing. I think that was another reason to write the book because in the nonfiction, it's like an account of events the way a journalist might tell it, but not as much maybe about what am I looking for here? The emotions and and what's at stake. I don't know.
So you get multiple perspectives that give it the sort of historical field?
Say again?
You get multiple perspectives, maybe?
Yeah.
That give it the historical.
Yeah. I mean, well, for example, the military guys. I mean, I imagine.
Where did you find that stuff?
I imagine. Well, there's in Corbin's book. There's the testimony of a guy named Ford, who was under General Mitchell or General
Mitchell.
Banholtz.
Oh, Banholtz, yeah.
Yeah. And he basically gives the straightforward testimony and stuff. But I guess when we look at the big picture, here was the U.S. military intervening in a labor war, with to the tune of 2,500.
A domestic labor war.
Say again?
A
domestic labor war. 2,500 troops marched in with a squadron of bombing planes. I mean, and you wonder who. I mean, you kind of know what the events that led to that decision, but how did the people feel? And there was one bit in the testimony of this guy Ford, when Chafin Chafin's people choose to make a raid on. I'm going to forget the name of the town. They choose to make a raid, and this guy dryly says, I mean, he tells the interviewer, which is a U.S. congressman, saying it was badly timed or something like this. It was a poor choice of timing to make a raid, because it turned. The miners had been going away, and then they suddenly come back. Yeah, right. And you wonder what's going on in this guy's mind, and if he doesn't really hold. And I built out this character to have him hold some respect for the miners and the situation here. I mean, one congressman said in the testimony that C.E. Lively, who killed Sid Hatfield, confessed that he was a Union officer. I mean, and this had happened more than once. These guys were the Baldwin Felts, acting as spies for the Union, rise to the level of vice president of the Union.
Local or something.
Yeah, so that they're making decisions and reporting to the company about all the awful things that the union is doing.
But they're the decision makers.
Right, and hearing this, one of the congressmen says, well, I am not surprised to hear that you are having trouble in West Virginia.
Yeah, because you're stirring the pot.
Yeah, right. He says it directly to C.E. Lively. He's just told that he was an officer.
Yeah. So what's the word? Provocateur?
Exactly. Agent provocateur.
And so you were able to meld all these various facets together in these particular characters and their particular stories, but you still have to. To what degree does the narrative confine you? To what degree does the narrative liberate you in telling the story?
You mean like the historical reality?
Yeah. I mean, you said it's a vehicle.
Yeah.
Is it an easy vehicle to drive? In other words,
especially as a journalist, you have to be ready to cut loose from the real events in various ways. The biggest change from real events, aside from the fact that I put a 1913 incident, the armored car incident. Armored train, yeah. Armored train, right. Yeah. I throw that in there as a substitute for
Bull Moose special.
Yeah, that's it. But I also changed the landscape. Okay. I have not seen, and maybe some of the archaeologists that are, I met a couple recently, can change my mind about this, but I have not seen written accounts of two forces shooting at each other across a valley. And that's pretty much the picture that I gave. I had to give, because I wanted them to see each other and have a battle. And more to the point, I have people wandering around in the no man's land, kind of watching the battle from going across. I thought that was a lot of fun.
But it was that proximity. I mean,
they were close.
They were
but
close
I think
enough.
The landscape, the most intense actual battle part of the Blair Mountain occurred when two forces, from my reading, two forces met each other in the woods, and they greeted each other, and they sat down together, and they sat down together for some while before they realized they were on opposite sides.
Wow.
And then the shooting began.
Oh my gosh.
And like 6 people died there.
Yeah.
And I portray that in the book as, you know, I mean, we live now in a very polarized society, and I used Blair Mountain to illustrate the dangers of the polarization of society that we are seeing today.
So it's a metaphor to some extent of what is still with us as Americans?
I don't know if I'd go that far. I don't know. It's not something that we cannot change. I think we're capable of change at any time.
Right.
But this use, the politicization of absolutely everything, and putting people on one side or another, for example. And I mean, there's probably many different ways of going about this. But the end result, I mean, is really the climax of the book, at the risk of spoiler alert.
No, but polarization is what I mean, is something that's still and very present.
Yeah, but there are different ways to polarize. I mean, we can be polarized by black and white. We can be polarized by Democrat, Republican. We can be polarized by union, non-union. And you know, it's almost like flavor of the month. And we need to rise above this stuff. You know.
Well, let me ask you about that period of time, though. During the mine wars, the polarization was more, I guess, clear-cut, maybe.
I don't know. That's the thing. That's what I mean. That's why I use this battle as the climax of the book. Nobody could recognize each other.
Right,
They're all shooting each other.
Even the Union people would argue about what to do.
No, I mean this battle where they meet in the woods, two different forces. They greet each other. They sit down. And then somebody realizes, you know, and somebody fires a shot, and soon they're all shooting each other, friend and foe. I mean, I think I named it the Battle of False Friends or something. But
it's a real event.
Yeah, it's a real event, and this struck me as kind of key, not only to this event in West Virginia history, but to a situation we're in now. I mean, we're taking shots at each other. And we really, without a clue, you know, just without a clue. And we're shooting our, you know.
It's like a reflex, maybe.
It is. It's just this particular event is just chaos, and you know, it was actually a lot of fun to write.
Well, I can imagine. I can imagine that being a lot of fun to film.
Yeah,
two camps of people kind of coming together and.
I drafted the thing as a
screenplay.
Film. Yeah.
Which is, again, a narrative, personal and visually close to the bone sort of way to deal with like a novel. So, well, Topper, I can't tell you how great it is to see you again. Yeah. It's been a while for me.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you did this. Whatever excuse to get you back to West Virginia was a good one.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
a lot for having me.
Sure.